Chapter 1. When the sky fell that afternoon, the sky wore a pale gray coat, hesitant, as though unsure whether to rain or not. Clara sat by the window, her head tilted slightly, finger tracing invisible circles on the fogged glass. From the kitchen came the gentle murmur of her mother's laughter, blending with the clumsy rustle of her father trying to help peel vegetables. The scent of cinnamon and warm bread floated in the air, cradling the home in a soft, comforting calm. They weren't rich, but Clara's family had three things that mattered far more than gold: love, warmth, and unexpected hugs from behind when no one was watching. She was their only child, long awaited, long cherished. Every afternoon after school, she'd run straight home, not because she feared being late for dinner, but because home meant her father waiting on the porch, her mother setting the table, her name spoken like it was the sweetest sound in the world. Clara was 18. University acceptance letter in her backpack, a head full of dreams and a heart still unscarred by grief. Life to her was a garden just beginning to bloom. She had never tasted loss until that evening. The phone rang at 6:17 p.m. Her mother answered. Clara couldn't hear the voice on the other end, but she saw the laughter vanish from her mother's face. The hand holding the phone trembled. Her eyes that had never held anything but joy suddenly became foreign, hollow. Clara's father had been in an accident, a car crash, a rainy mountain road. His vehicle had slid off the cliff. No survivors. Clara didn't remember much after that. Just pieces: her mother screaming, then going silent for days. The funeral under relentless rain. The scent of white lilies mixed with mud. The photo of her father in a simple wooden frame, too still to be real. She thought that was the end of sorrow. But sorrow has siblings, and it doesn't travel alone. Weeks passed. Her mother began to cough, then wither, then fall quiet. Her vibrant, spirited mother, who once danced in the kitchen with flour on her cheeks, began to vanish in slow motion. The diagnosis came like a cruel echo: late-stage cancer. Her heart had broken long before her body did. Clara spent her 19th birthday sitting beside her mother's hospital bed, holding a hand that felt too cold. 3 weeks later, that hand slipped from hers. No goodbye. And just like that, the house fell silent. No more footsteps. No more laughter. No more Sunday pancakes or lullabies sung under breath. Just Clara, sitting at the kitchen table, staring at two empty chairs and holding a photograph frame in both hands as if it might anchor her. She sold the house to pay off the medical bills. There was no choice, no one to help. The once happy girl, who had never done a grocery run alone, now stood at a train station with one suitcase and nowhere to go. A distant relative, a woman her mother had barely spoken to in years, agreed to take her in. The tone of her voice made it clear. This wasn't kindness. It was duty. And so, Clara boarded a train to a city that had never known her name. She looked out the window as the countryside blurred past, and she realized something. Her life had changed forever. Not with thunder, not with fire, but with a phone call, a rainstorm, and 2 funerals. At 18, Clara had no one left in the world. Just herself and a future that suddenly felt too big, too cold, and too cruel. Chapter 2. The city that doesn't wait. City didn't greet Clara with open arms. It didn't offer comfort, or kindness, or even time to grieve. It merely stood there, cold, towering, impatient. Glass buildings reflected a sky too bright to mourn beneath, and the people brushed past her as though she were invisible. And perhaps, for a moment, she was. Clara arrived at the train station with one suitcase, a half-empty wallet, and a folded piece of paper with an address scribbled by her aunt, the distant relative who agreed, with a clipped voice over the phone, to let her stay for a while, not out of love, but out of obligation. The difference was sharp, and Clara could feel it before she even knocked on the door. The house smelled of bleach and resentment. Her aunt, a woman with pursed lips and permanently furrowed brows, handed her a list of house rules before even asking if she'd eaten. No guests, no noise, no free rides. Clara smiled politely. She thanked her. She unpacked in the attic room that barely had space to stretch her legs. She didn't cry that night, lying on a creaky cot with her jacket as a blanket. She stared at the ceiling and whispered, "I'll be okay." She wasn't sure if it was a prayer or a lie. Days passed. Clara scoured the city for part-time jobs. No resume, no references, just a shy smile and a pair of hands willing to work. Most places turned her away. Some leered, a few made promises they never intended to keep. she finally landed a waitressing job in a cramped diner near the train station. The manager didn't ask much, just that she smile and don't break anything. The pay was minimum, the tips were worse. But it was a start. She learned to carry 4 plates at once, dodge greasy hands, and fake a cheerful tone while her feet bled inside cheap shoes. Each night, she returned to the attic with aching limbs and an emptier soul. Her aunt never asked how her day was, only if she remembered to buy more milk. One evening, Clara came home late. A customer had refused to pay and cursed her out in front of a crowd. She held it together all the way back, but once inside the attic, something in her broke. She sank to the floor and sobbed into her hands, not like a child, but like someone who had been too strong for too long. But even in that moment, something stirred inside her. She remembered her father's voice. Never let the world decide who you are, Clara. That's your job. She sat up, wiped her tears, and made a decision. She wouldn't let this city break her. If it didn't offer her a place, she would carve one out herself. If no one believed in her, she would become someone they couldn't ignore. She didn't know how. She didn't have a plan. Just a spark, small, but alive. And sometimes, that's all it takes. Chapter 3. A door that wasn't meant to open. Clara didn't believe in miracles anymore. She believed in bills piling up, aching feet, and long nights spent staring at a cracked ceiling, wondering how to stretch a $20 note into a week's worth of meals. She believed in polite rejections and cold glances from her aunt, in empty coffee cups and shoes with holes in the soles. But that day, something changed. It started the same as every other. She left the diner at dusk, apron still smeared with coffee stains and grease. Her shift had been long, and her tips barely enough to cover bus fare. But she walked anyway, head down, shoulders tight, as if shielding herself from a world that had already taken too much. The streets were slick with rain. Neon signs flickered above cracked sidewalks, and the city buzzed with indifference. Clara passed by rows of high-end stores she could never afford to enter, and alleyways that whispered of danger if one lingered too long. Then it happened. She stopped outside a gallery purely by accident. The glass windows shimmered under the rain, displaying abstract paintings she couldn't name. She didn't know why she paused. Maybe it was the warmth of the lights inside, or the music's soft jazz pouring out through a slightly ajar door. Curious, half frozen, she stepped in. Just for a minute, just to feel human again. She didn't belong there. Her wet sneakers squeaked on the polished floor. Her jacket was 2 sizes too big, and her hair clung to her cheeks like threads of shadow. But no one stopped her. No one asked her to leave. Inside, the air smelled of citrus and fresh paper. People stood in small groups, sipping wine, murmuring about light and texture and soul. Clara didn't understand any of it. But for the first time in weeks, she felt invisible in a way that didn't hurt. She drifted to the back, drawn by a single painting, simple, yet haunting. A field under a stormy sky. Nothing dramatic, just quiet sadness. It reminded her of home. What do you see? A voice asked behind her. She turned, startled. The man was tall, in his late 40s perhaps, with gray-streaked hair and eyes that seemed to study everything with both curiosity and caution. He wasn't dressed like the others, no suit, no pretense, just a scarf slung over one shoulder and a sketchbook in hand. I don't know, Clara said honestly. It looks like grief, but also like waiting for something better. He smiled, not politely, genuinely. Most people just say nice colors. You've got better eyes than that. She blushed, unsure what to say. He didn't press. Instead, he asked, do you paint? She shook her head. Draw? No, but, you see. It wasn't a question. It was a quiet recognition. He looked at her name tag still pinned to her chest. Clara, he said, nodding. I'm Elias. If you ever want to learn, come back. Not to impress anyone, just for yourself. He handed her a card. Not business, not formal, just a simple piece of paper with a street name and a time. Saturday, 10 a.m. She looked down at it as though it might vanish if she blinked. Why me? She asked, barely above a whisper. Because, he said, sometimes the doors were not meant to open. Lead to the places we're most meant to be. Then he disappeared into the crowd. Clara stood there for a long moment, card in hand, heart louder than before. She didn't know who he was or what he saw in her. She didn't know if it was real or just a fluke, but for the first time in a very long time, she had something to look forward to. Chapter 4. the place where dreams are. Quetzalcoatl came with soft morning light and a chill that curled gently around Clara's fingers as she clutched the card in her coat pocket. She had almost talked herself out of going. Twice. Once when she looked at her reflection in the mirror and saw the same tired eyes, the same worn-out jacket, the same girl who had nothing left to offer the world. And once more when her aunt scoffed at her quietly leaving the apartment and said, "Make sure you're not wasting time on foolish things." But something in Clara resisted giving up. A thread pulled taut inside her, delicate but unbreakable. She followed it like a lifeline, all the way to a narrow street tucked between two faded bookstores. The building was small, almost hidden. No grand sign, just a wooden door with chipped paint and the faint smell of turpentine and dust wafting. From inside, she knocked. It creaked open. "Clara," Elias greeted her like he had expected her all along. The room wasn't a studio in the way she'd imagined, no walls lined with expensive equipment or buzzing with energy. It was quiet. There were easels scattered about, a shelf of books leaning like sleepy thinkers, and light spilling through tall windows like spilled gold. 4 others were already there, different ages, different stories written in their postures. No one asked why she came. No one cared about the diner uniform beneath her coat. Elias handed her a pencil. "Start with what's real," he said. "Not what's beautiful. Beauty comes later." She hesitated, staring at the blank paper as if it might judge her. But then her hand moved. It was clumsy, hesitant, raw. She drew a window, a hand on glass, a girl sitting alone at a kitchen table. Elias passed behind her once, paused briefly, and said only one word, "Good." It wasn't praise. It wasn't flattery. It was truth, and that made it heavier. Week after week, she returned. Something shifted inside her, subtle at first. Her hands grew steadier. Her lines became bolder. The silence she once feared became a shelter. Drawing wasn't just expression, it was resurrection. The pain that had no place to go now had somewhere to land. She began sketching the people at the diner when they weren't looking. Her aunt's gnarled hands, the cracked tea mug she always drank from, her own face in reflections she usually avoided. Elias never lectured. He only guided. He never asked about her past, but she had the strange feeling he already knew, or worse, understood, without needing to. One afternoon, she stayed behind after everyone else had left. She asked him, "Why do you do this?" "For people like us." He looked up from his sketchbook, eyes tired but kind. "Because I once had no one to believe in me," he said. "And someone did. Just once. That was enough to change everything." Clara swallowed hard. Her chest felt tight, not with sadness this time, but with something she hadn't felt in months, hope. That night, she walked home under a violet sky. The city still didn't know her name. The diner still paid her poorly. Her aunt still frowned like it was a habit. But Clara was different now. She carried something in her pocket more powerful than keys or money, a pencil, a path, a promise to herself. She was still invisible to the world, but for the first time she could see herself. Chapter 5. The Stranger Who. Watch from the shadows. There are people who walk past us every day without leaving a mark. And then there are those who say nothing but change everything. Clara first noticed him on a Tuesday. She was wiping down the diner counter after the lunch rush, fingers moving automatically, her mind still lost in the charcoal strokes of her last sketch. Then, in the reflection of the window, she saw him. He sat alone at the corner booth, coffee untouched, eyes not on the menu but on her. Their eyes met for only a second, but it was long enough. His gaze wasn't flirtatious, nor aggressive. It was searching, as if trying to remember something he couldn't quite name. She blinked, and the moment passed. He lowered his head. She finished her shift, chalked it up to coincidence, and went home. But then he came back. Thursday, Saturday, Monday again. Always the same booth, always the same quiet stare. He never stayed long, just long enough to make Clara's pulse quicken with unease or curiosity. She couldn't tell which. He wasn't threatening. He was too still. One evening, after closing, Clara sat with Elias in the studio. The rain tapped softly on the windows as she sketched a pair of eyes, deep set, familiar, haunting. Elias glanced over her shoulder. "Someone from memory?" he asked. She hesitated. "I don't know." But she did know. It was him. That night, Clara walked home faster than usual, her coat collar pulled up, footsteps echoing on the wet pavement. The city never slept, but it sometimes watched. Behind her, quiet as breath, footsteps followed. She spun around. N01. The street was empty, but the cold on the back of her neck wouldn't leave. The next day, he didn't show up, nor the next, but when Clara returned to the studio that weekend, something waited for her, a sketchpad. Not hers, left on her usual stool. Inside drawings, not just of her family, her father, smiling on their porch, her mother, brushing Clara's hair, even the old swing in their backyard drawn with painful detail, intimate, real. She staggered back, breath caught in her throat. Elias, did you see who left this? She asked, voice shaking. He picked up the sketchbook, flipped through it silently, and then looked at her. This man, he said slowly, tapping a page. He's not a stranger to you, is he? Clara stared. The face on the page was older now, sharper, hardened, but she remembered. She knew those eyes. He had once been her father's closest friend, like an uncle, and he had disappeared right after the accident. Chapter 6. The truth beneath the wreckages. Didn't sleep that night. The sketchbook lay open on the floor beside her bed, its pages too heavy to close. The man's face stared up at her. From the paper, sketched with shadows and grief, Clara hadn't seen him in nearly 2 years since the funeral, since he vanished without a word. His name echoed like a ghost. Martin Hale, her father's best friend, the man who held Clara on his shoulders when she was small, who brought birthday presents wrapped in silver paper, who used to laugh so loud it shook the kitchen walls, and who disappeared the moment her world collapsed. Now he was back, watching, drawing, leaving silent breadcrumbs in graphite. Clara's fingers trembled as she picked up the last page. Her childhood home, drawn from the exact angle only someone who'd been there could know. She had to find him. The next evening, she returned to the diner early. Her hands were restless, her heart louder than the city itself. The clock ticked, and with each passing second, doubt slithered deeper into her chest. But then he appeared. 6:43 p.m. Same coat, same booth, same silence. Clara walked over before she could stop herself. Her voice barely held steady. Martin. He looked up slowly. His expression didn't shift. Not shock, not guilt, just quiet recognition. You remember me, she said. He nodded. I never forgot. Then why did you disappear? She whispered. Why now? Why this? He said nothing, then pushed something across the table. A photograph. Her father, standing beside his car, smiling. On the back, one sentence written in ink. He knew too much. Clara's blood ran cold. What does this mean? Martin glanced out the window, scanning the street, then back at her. Your father wasn't in an accident, he said. He was silenced. The words hit her like ice water. No, she shook her head. That's not no one ever said because they made sure no one would. His voice was low, sharp. He was investigating something, a company, fraud, cover-ups, names that didn't want to be found. He was getting close. And then, the brakes failed. Clara couldn't breathe. Her world spun again, not with grief, this time, but with rage. You knew, and you said nothing. I had no proof, he said bitterly. Only fear. They threatened my family. I thought by staying away, I could keep you safe too. Tears welled in Clara's eyes, but they didn't fall. Not this time. Why come back now? Because someone is watching you now, Clara, he said. They think you're just a waitress, but you're your father's daughter, and someone out there remembers that. She felt the walls closing in. The past wasn't past. It had only been waiting. Martin stood. You want answers? Start with this. He slid her a folded page. An old email, dated a week before the crash, from her father. Subject line, if anything happens to me, follow the money. Then he left. Just like that, into the rain. No goodbye. Clara sat there, numb. Grief had brought her to the city, but now truth was calling her forward. And Clara, the girl who once trembled in silence, now had a reason to rise, not just for herself, but for justice. Chapter 7. The dead left. The paper trembled in her hand, but Clara's resolve did not. Back in the attic, under the weak bulb that flickered overhead, she unfolded the message. Again, her father's name, her father's words. If anything happens to me, follow the money. It wasn't just a warning. It was a breadcrumb. And Clara had spent too long living in the shadows. Now, she was ready to follow the trail. The next morning, Clara skipped her shift at the diner for the first time in months. She took the bus to the city library, old, quiet, and mostly empty. With trembling fingers, she typed her father's name into the public records database. Jonathan Walsh, former corporate auditor, deceased. She dug deeper. The last company he had been investigating, Velenex Holdings, on the surface, it was just another energy firm. But the deeper she clicked, the stranger it became. Shell companies, offshore accounts, sudden resignations. Clara felt like she was unraveling a sweater and discovering snakes inside. Then, in a forgotten financial blog 3 years old, she found a name mentioned in passing. MarloEdgewater.it stopped her cold. Chapter 9. The girl who lit the fuse. Clara didn't run this time. She acted. Before dawn broke, she was already at the public library, hunched over a computer in the farthest corner, hoodie pulled low, every muscle wired for alertness. She uploaded the first set of files, not all just enough. Enough to turn heads, enough to spark panic. Shell accounts, illegal transfers, the names of 3 major charities, each one tied to Velenex Holdings. She didn't wait for permission. She didn't wait for help. She posted the files to an anonymous leak forum, one frequented by watchdogs, truth seekers, and the occasional whistleblower with nothing left to lose. Then she watched. It took less than 30 minutes for the comments to explode. Is this real? These names are untouchable. Someone's about to get killed. Mirror everything. Save copies. This is nuclear. And then, Velenex is finished. Clara sat back. Her hands trembled. But not from fear. From adrenaline. From fire. For the first time in what felt like centuries, she had power. She left the library with a burner phone in one pocket and a backup drive in her boot. Every alley felt like a trap, every step a countdown. But she no longer moved like prey. She was the fuse. And the flame had caught. By evening, the news cycle began to churn. Small blogs, independent reporters, a few cryptic tweets from former employees. Nothing mainstream yet, but it was only a matter of time. Velenex's name had been whispered in shadows for years. Now, it was being dragged into the light. Clara kept walking, until she heard a voice behind her, low, cold. You should have stayed invisible. She turned just in time to see the glint of a knife, but before it could reach her, a shout, a scuffle, and suddenly, Martin was there. The blade dropped. The attacker fled into the night. Clara collapsed against the wall, shaking. Martin looked down at her, breathless. They're watching everything now. Phones, cameras, even this street. I know, she whispered, but I couldn't wait anymore. He helped her up. You lit the fuse, Clara. I know. Then you better be ready because the explosion is coming. That night, the story broke wide. A leaked video from an anonymous source showed executives from Velenex in a private meeting, discussing payouts, forged audits, and a problematic auditor who wouldn't let go, her father. The footage hit the underground first, then flooded Twitter, Telegram, Reddit, and finally national television. It couldn't be buried anymore. The world now knew his name. Jonathan Walsh, the man they silenced, and by morning, they would know hers too. Clara Walsh, the girl who set fire to giants. Marlo had once come to their house when she was a child. She remembered his sharp suit, his leather gloves even in spring, and the way her father grew tense every time he appeared. A former board member at Velenex, now the CEO of a private security firm. Her heart pounded. She printed everything she could find, her hands blackened by ink and truth. But just as she was about to pack her bag, she noticed it. The same man, from the diner. No, not Martin. Someone else, across the library, pretending to browse the newspapers, but watching her reflection in the glass. He wasn't holding a book. He wasn't blinking. Clara's skin crawled. She stuffed the papers into her bag and slipped out the back exit. The city had never felt more alive, more dangerous. Back in her attic room, she spread the documents out like puzzle pieces. There were holes, gaps, whispers between the lines, but she could feel it building. Something her father had discovered, something worth killing for. She pulled out an old showbox, her mother's keepsake box. Photos, cards, old receipts. At the very bottom, hidden between 2 birthday cards, she found it, a USB drive. No label, just dust. She stared at it for a long moment before sliding it into her old laptop. The screen flickered, then opened a folder, dozens of files, invoices, spreadsheets, names, transfers, and one final video. She clicked it. Her father's face filled the screen. Clara, he began, his voice tight, his eyes fierce. If you're seeing this, It means they got to me. She clamped a hand over her mouth. I don't know how much time I have, but you must know Velenex is not just stealing money. They're laundering it through fake charities, pushing land grabs, and silencing anyone who gets too close. I found something big, and they know it. He leaned closer. There's one man who helped me hide the truth, Martin. If he's still alive, trust him. The rest is in the drive. Be careful, Clara. They won't stop. The video cut to black. Clara stared at the screen long after it ended. Her throat was tight, her hands trembled, but in her chest, something blazed brighter than fear, fire, purpose, vengeance. Her father hadn't died in vain, and she would make sure they paid for it. Chapter 8. Hunted. The world didn't change. Overnight, the city still blinked with indifferent lights. The diners still smelled of burnt coffee and old grease. But Clara had changed. She no longer walked with her head down, no longer clutched her coat like a shield. Now, every step she took was deliberate, every glance sharper. She was no longer running from grief, she was walking toward justice. The first thing she did was reach out to a journalist. Her father had once mentioned her name, Irene Calloway, an investigative reporter who had written exposés that made entire corporations tremble. Clara found her email, typed and retyped her message a dozen times. Subject: Jonathan Walsh. Evidence: I need to talk. She hit send, waited. That night, sleep did not come easily. The next morning, she received a reply: meet me, PM tomorrow. The red bench at Kingsley Park. No signature, just an address. Clara stared at the screen, pulse racing. She had no reason to trust Irene, but even less reason not to. And besides, she had to start somewhere. The next day, Clara left early. She wore a plain hoodie, tied her hair back, and kept the USB close against her chest. Kingsley Park was quiet in the afternoons, just strollers, pigeons, and the occasional old man feeding crumbs to silence. She spotted the red bench, but Irene wasn't there. Not yet. Clara sat, waited. Minutes passed. Then more. She glanced at her phone. 4:08 p.m. Still nothing. And then a scream. It came from the far end of the park. People turned. A crowd began to form. Clara hesitated, then walked toward the noise, heart thudding. That's when she saw her, Irene, collapse near the fountain. Eyes wide, unmoving, a tremble in her chest. Then nothing. Someone yelled. She just dropped. No pulse. Paramedics were called, but Clara already knew. She was too late, or rather someone else had been early. Clara backed away slowly. Her mind screamed. Her breath came short and shallow. She didn't cry, didn't shout. She ran until her lungs burned, until her legs felt like glass. Back to the attic, locked the door, shoved a chair under the knob, then collapsed to the floor, gasping, heart rattling against her ribs like a bird in a cage. They knew she had the files. They knew she had reached out, and now they were hunting her. That night, she didn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling and listened every creak, every whisper of wind outside. She understood something now. This wasn't a game. It never had been. The people who killed her father, the ones who ruined her life, they didn't just silence, they erased. They covered their tracks with funerals, and she had just stepped into their crosshairs. But she wasn't the same girl they thought she was. She wasn't fragile. She wasn't invisible. She was fire waiting to ignite. Chapter 10. When the ashes settled, the city didn't stop when the truth came out. It spun faster. News vans lined up outside Velenex's headquarters. Executives were dragged from boardrooms in handcuffs. The footage Clara leaked played on repeat. Her father's name now spoken with reverence, no longer buried in silence. And yet, Clara knew this wasn't over, because not all fires leave smoke. Some enemies wait beneath the ash. It came 2 nights later. She was leaving Elias's studio, a sketchbook under her arm, when the car pulled up beside her. Not fast, not loud. Just inevitable. The window rolled down. Inside, a familiar face, Irene Calloway. But no, her skin prickled. Something was wrong. The eyes were the same, but colder now. And then Clara saw the thin scar behind her ear, the one that wasn't there in the photo she had saved. This wasn't Irene. It was her sister, Danica Calloway, former PR fixer, last seen in court documents, defending Velenex. I warned them not to underestimate you, Danica said softly. You're very clever. Clara froze, her heart a war drum in her chest. What do you want? To make you disappear. Again, the door opened. A hand reached out, but before Clara could move, bang, a gunshot shattered the air. Danica slumped. Blood bloomed across her collarbone. Clara stumbled back, gasping. From the shadows, Martin stepped forward, gun still raised, face grim. She was going to finish what they started, he said. But not this time. Sirens wailed in the distance. Clara looked down at Danica, then back at Martin. One more ghost laid to rest. 3 weeks later, the trial began. Martin testified. Elias came forward too. Clara stood on the witness stand, hands steady, voice clear. Her father's files were now part of federal evidence. The drive that nearly cost her life had become a sword in the courtroom. Velenex fell, but more than that, her name was cleared. Newspapers called her the firebrand daughter. TV anchors called her the girl who burned the lie. But to Clara, she was just free. Months passed. The attic room was empty now. Her aunt had moved out quietly when Clara's name appeared in the news. No apology, no goodbye. She didn't need one. Clara had moved into a small apartment above a quiet bookstore. She painted in the mornings, volunteered at a shelter on weekends. Her life was simple but hers. One evening, Elias visited. He brought a canvas unfinished. "It's yours now," he said. Clara looked at it, a girl standing in a field under a stormy sky. She took up the brush, and for the first time, added sunlight. Epilogue. A year later, a new exhibit opened. Ashes and Light, the Clara Walsh collection. People walked through in silence, faces moved by the grief, the courage, the fire in every line. But most of all by the final piece, a girl, no longer broken, no longer hiding, standing tall, with eyes full of knowing. The girl who fell, then rose, and never looked back. Sometimes, life doesn't break us all at once. It breaks us in silence, in the quiet after a phone call, in the emptiness of a chair never filled again. Clara's story is not just about revenge. It's about rising not with rage, but with purpose. Not to destroy, but to rebuild where something was once stolen. If you've ever been lost, forgotten, or silenced, may this story remind you, your voice still matters. Your fire still burns, and your healing is your power. Thank you for walking this journey with Clara. If her story touched you, leave a comment below and share which moment stayed with you the most. And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories of broken girls who rise and quiet strength that becomes unstoppable.